The Curse of Edgelane Hall. Edgelane Hall was always whispered to be cursed, a grand house from the 16th century that vanished beneath the modern city's skin. It was said to have its secret chamber, its ghostly lady behind the south window, and a subterranean passage no one ever found. It was demolished in 1913. The old foundations were buried, but the ground itself never seemed to rest. There has been many witness accounts over the years. Eleanor of Peet Street, the 1950s. In the early 1950s, when homes began to rise over what once been the fields and gardens of Edgelane Hall, a young woman named Eleanor, living on Peet Street, began to experience strange things in her house. Eleanor was newly married, her husband was often away at sea, and she was expecting their first child. She said that at first it was small things, objects moving from one place to another, footsteps on the stairs when she was alone, and the sound of chains dragging outside her window late at night. When she looked, there was nobody there. Neighbours told her not to worry, that old stories about the hall curse were just that, stories. But Eleanor began to see figures around her home, faint silhouettes drifting along the back alley where the boundary of the old estate once ran. They never spoke, never knocked, just wandered, fading before she could call out. Her strangest account came one stormy night. She was woken from sleep by a rhythmic knocking sound, steady and hollow, coming from the spare room at the back of the house. The clock said it was nearly 2 a.m. The sound wouldn't stop. Her husband was away on a ship somewhere in the Atlantic. Eleanor got out of bed, her heart hammering. She crossed the landing in her nightdress, the air cold enough to sting her skin. The spare room door was slightly ajar, and through the narrow gap she could see something moving, a shadow swaying in the moonlight. When she pushed the door open, she froze. In the far corner of the room stood a small, twisted figure, no taller than a child, a man-shaped thing with distorted limbs and a face that seemed half human, half demon. Its eyes were black and glinting in the moonlight, its mouth stretched into a terrible grin. In its arms, it cradles something that looked like a baby. Eleanor tried to scream, but no sound came. The thing raised one finger to its lips in a silent shush, holding her gaze, and then it was gone. The room was empty, the air was heavy, still humming with whatever had been there. She ran barefoot through the streets to her mother's house, sobbing and shaking. Her mother, terrified but trying to calm her, admitted that she'd been warned about that house, told by the friend who rented it to her cheaply that the land was cursed, that it once belonged to the grounds of a haunted hall long demolished. Months later, Eleanor gave birth to her child, a baby boy, small and frail, born with dwarfism. Though she loved him dearly, she never forgot that night. She never set foot in that Peet Street house again. People say Peet Street and the nearby surrounding roads carry that shadow, strange noises at night, shapes in the windows of modern flats, lights that drift through the mist, where the gardens once lay. Some claim the spirit seen by Eleanor was one of the servants or children from Edgelane Hall, perhaps warped by the curse that fell when the house was razed. Others whispered it was something older, something bound to the land before even the hall was built. Locals say that if you walk down Peet Street after midnight, you hear the faint clink of chains and a child's voice humming from somewhere you can't quite locate. And sometimes when the moon is full, people swear they see small dark figures watching from upstairs in the windows, smiling. The last tenant of Edgelane Hall. They said Edgelane Hall was never quiet, even long before it was demolished in 1913. Whispers told of footsteps in corridors that no longer existed on the plans, and of voices that belonged to no tenant, past or present. The locals would cross themselves when passing after dark, muttering of a secret chamber and a passage under the earth, though no one could ever prove such things were real. The hall, with its tangled history of Wrights, Athertons and Lees, seemed cursed with disputes. Lands were sold, debts called in, fortunes ruined. Each new name etched into the deeds seemed to vanish into hardship. Yet those who stayed at the hall spoke of something stranger than legal wranglings. They spoke of a woman in the south window. That window, 11 feet tall, stared across the meadows where once orchards and hemp fields grew. Passers-by swore they had seen a pale figure standing there, her hands pressed to the glass, her mouth moving silently as though begging to be heard. One night in the 1820s, when John Shaw Lee held the estate, a servant girl was ordered to fetch water from the orchard well. She returned pale and stammering, insisting she had seen a woman rise from the shadows of the broad field. The figure, she said, carrying a lantern that gave no light, and her dress was ragged, as though rotted by the earth. The servant claimed the woman whispered, "Find me, or I shall not rest." The girl never returned to service. The next morning, her family took her away, swearing the hall was cursed. Rumours grew that a chamber lay beneath the south wing, bricked up long before the Wright family lost the estate. When the hall was finally demolished for the Liverpool exhibition in 1913, workmen uncovered the Great South Wall, and with it that same towering window. No one spoke of it openly, but one labourer later told his wife of what he saw. As the wall collapsed, for the briefest moment, he glimpsed the figure of a woman behind the glass staring at him with hollow eyes, though the window had long been walled up on the inside. The ground where Edgelane Hall stood has been built over, paved and repurposed a dozen times since. But some nights, when the air is damp and the street lamps haze in the mist, drivers along Edgelane claim they see her still standing there, a pale woman by the roadside, lantern in hand, raising her free hand as though pressing it against unseen glass. And if you roll down your window, you'll hear her whisper, "Find me." One witness account from the old Mersey Times, in a fragment of remembrance preserved in local memory and recorded in the old Mersey Times, a man named Thomas Harris, a labourer present when Edgelane Hall was being pulled down. He claimed he saw something no one could explain. As the workmen dismantled the great south wall, revealing the walled-up window, he stood with his pickaxe at the ready. In the moon's pale glow, he swore he saw a figure behind that window, though the space behind it had long since been sealed. The figure, he said, raised one hand and stared at him with empty eyes before vanishing like smoke through the brick. Harris reportedly turned to shout to his companions, but none had seen anything. Their torches flickered with the stones shifted as though something had been disturbed. From that night on, Harris avoided Edgelane altogether. Among villagers, his story became one of the few to echo in hushed tones as the hall faded into ruins. They said Edgelane Hall was never truly quiet. Decades after Edgelane Hall was demolished, its land has been subsumed by roads, buildings, shops, modern life pressing on the soil once claimed by the hall. But some people who live or work on those grounds claim the old mansion is anything but gone. A shopkeeper near Edgelane, a woman named Amira Jones, who runs a small cafe in one of the retail units close to where the hall's south wing once stood, says she started hearing footsteps above her cafe floorboards late at night. After closing, she describes them as a slow, heavy boots, like someone pacing. One night, she climbed the back stairs, expecting maybe a trespasser or a rat, but nothing there, just the echo of the steps fading into silence. Amira also says she's seen a pale shape standing by the darkened window at the end of the corridor. No face, just a silhouette. She feels cold when she passes, like a low draft, though all windows are shut. A night guard at a local warehouse. A security guard named Mark Lewis works nights in a warehouse which backs onto part of the land where the old hall's gardens once sprawled. On one shift around 2 a.m, he took his usual patrol route along the perimeter fence. He says he saw a lantern's flicker in the field beyond the fence, where now there is an empty lot and trees. The light seemed to move slowly towards what would have been the south facade's line. He called out, but the light bobbed, then vanished. Mark later checked cameras, nothing. He asked colleagues, no one heard or saw anything. But he says, ever since that night, he refuses to walk that stretch alone. Residents in the new housing development, in the housing estates built over part of the old hall site, a young couple, Sarah and Tom, moving in about 10 years ago, began noticing weird things. Children playing, laughter in the yard, just as dusk falls, though there were no children outside. Doors slamming upstairs, though nobody's walking in the halls. And a fleeting face at the top of a stairwell window looking out, eyes fixed, expressionless, just for a moment before disappearing. Sarah says she sometimes wakes up to the sound of someone whispering her name, soft and distant, though Tom insists he hears nothing. These modern accounts mirror the older ones, the unexplained presence, glimpses through windows, lantern-like lights, footsteps, cold spots, the strange window in the south wall, long walled up, reappears in memory, if not in structure. In these modern stories, as though the spirit associated with it can't quite give up that threshold. They say when a place is torn down, its ghosts don't just vanish. They cling to what's left, the soil, the stone, the very air that remembers them. Edgelane Hall is gone, its foundations buried under concrete, its gardens turned to streets and car parks. But if you listen, really listen, you can still hear the echoes. Chains dragging along Peet Street, a woman crying in the dark, and somewhere just beyond the edge of the streetlights, a small figure standing still, smiling up at the windows of the new homes, and now stand where the old ones fell. The curse of Edgelane Hall was never broken, it was only buried, waiting. So, if you ever find yourself walking there late at night and you hear something knocking softly, rhythmically, from a room you thought was empty, don't open the door, because some hauntings don't end with the house, they end with you. I'm Mr. Strange, and this has been another tale from Liverpool's haunted past. Join me next time, if you dare.